Welcome to From the White Pillbox, the podcast where we stomp on statism and find the white pills along the road to a stateless society. I'm your host, Mark Maresca. I'm the author of the Substack articles of the same name, From the White Pillbox, content specifically for the already red-pilled, libertarians, voluntarists, anarchists, people who've overcome the myth of statism or are close to it. It's easy for us to be black-pilled, to believe evil will win. That's where the White Pillbox comes in. There are real-world reasons to have hope. Let's get going. Greetings all. Thank you so much for listening today. This episode will be part 15 of my series on the myth of authority. Today we're continuing our discussion about the transition to a free society. This will be a pretty lengthy one because we're going to be uncovering a lot of real-world white pills. First, let me recap the big takeaway from the last episode, one of the most significant white pills of all. In the transition to a free society, the state itself will be backing off, slowly and systematically. Here's the reason. The general environment, the overall conditions will be shifting. What used to be a welcoming environment for statism will be changing to a not-so-favorable one. The reason the environment will be changing will be because the myth of authority will be eroding. I suggest you listen to this entire Myth of Authority series, if you haven't already, to get the full picture. I've linked to the initial episode of the series in the show notes. How the myth of authority connects to the environment is psychological. Here's the basic idea. An environment, any environment, can be conducive to a particular outcome. Raw meat attracts flies. A magnet attracts metal. A garden attracts pests. Well, it's just as true for the environment created by the myth of authority. That environment attracts what I call the state bullies, who are all too happy to use the myth to wield power. The myth is the cause. The state is the effect. That describes the environment through pretty much all of man's history. Because the myth of political authority was entrenched, statism remained entrenched. When an environment changes, the end results can change. Remove the raw meat and the flies disappear. Remove the magnet and the metal is no longer attracted. Spray the garden with pesticides and pests stay away from this new garden environment. Same for statism. It flourishes in a statism-friendly environment. That is, until the myth of authority starts to erode. Along the way, people get less welcoming of bullies trying to rule over them. They no longer signal by their words and behavior that they want rulers. The environment is less hospitable for existing and potential bullies. They find other things to do over time. This is exactly what is now starting to play out. In these last 50 years, the myth of authority has started to be questioned. And at this stage today, we are starting to see the first signs it's bearing fruit. Now, further down the road, as the transition plays out, as the myth of authority further weakens, the state backs off much more tangibly. Again, the changing environment is the key. It gets even less hospitable with time. The bullies will feel the metaphorical glass changing under their feet. They'll sense the cracks forming. They won't like it. The bullies will simply do what we all do naturally. Choose the options in life that come with the least costs and the least trouble. When other options are more attractive than politics, they'll gravitate there instead. Okay, so now let's dive back in. Up to now, I've basically made a logical case that the transition has started, that the myth of authority has started to be questioned and started to erode, and that, as a result, the environment will shift for the state bullies for the worse. But all that can still sound theoretical, especially at this early stage where the vast majority still cling to the myth. It sure doesn't seem obvious that people are starting to question it, let alone it being felt by the state bullies. Well, nothing helps a logical argument more than real-world examples. So let's see if the real world can give us some. Let's start right off with COVID. the example I provided last time. A worldwide hysteria grew out of the overreactions of governments, the media, and academia. People went along with all the measures the state threw at them. Why? They gave in to mass fear, and the bullies loved it. They could keep people basically on house arrest, close businesses and schools, implement distancing and mask mandates, vaccine passports, not to mention silence dissenters. And people followed in lockstep. That's statism 101. The myth of authority makes people compliant, creating a welcoming environment for statism. Lots of libertarians worried that the various mandates would become permanent. Nope, not really. A few years into it, something happens. People start to get over it. Not 100%, but enough to be noticeable to the bullies. There was enough pushback against them so that the environment now became unfavorable. And in short order, the bullies self-backed off. So there is the white pill way that the COVID experience actually helped the transition. The state and its key handmaidens, media, academia, the medical industry, were so heavy-handed and so very wrong that they undermined their own legitimacy, made themselves less trustworthy. Not to everyone, of course, but now fewer people had blind faith in their authority. That many more chips in the glass that holds up the state. Let's move on to talk about the major media, the traditional news organizations we all grew up with. I want you to think about how important they are to the state. Without the media, politicians would have no audience. They don't act directly in front of you. They don't talk directly to you. They need the media to record them and send their messages along to you. Without the media, they'd spew out a lot of propaganda, but no one would hear it to get propagandized. No, the very purpose of corporate media is to capture state propaganda and deliver it into your head. The media ensures the state has a mouthpiece, so it's not just yelling into the wind. Think about it. You would never hear from the state were it not for the corporate media. It's quite literally the difference between a politician being able to plant fear and propaganda into your head and not being able to. And it's not only the media dutifully passing the state's messages along, they also add to the message, enhancing the fear and propaganda. The point is, whatever it is you get to learn about what the state is doing is through the media who deliver the statist content. Okay, then, wait a minute. All that assumes you're listening in the first place. But what if fewer and fewer are even paying attention to the media? It's tough to propagandize people if they aren't listening. Well, welcome to yet another huge white pill. We are living that right now. Let me show you why. Tom Woods recently said this, quote, "We are still living through the transformation of information transmission from television to new media. So we still have this intuitive feeling that television is important," unquote. Think about the implications of that statement. He's basically saying that traditional media, the media we all grew up with, the evening news, the big newspapers, that's dying. The only reason they get any attention is the inertia of the past. It's an old, rusting, rundown truck out of gas, but still rolling on its final inertia. Anyone still watching does it from habit. Look at the actual numbers. How many viewers, if you had to guess, would you say watch the traditional news media like ABC, Fox, CNN, MSNBC? I'm talking their main news shows and main news personalities, like the CNN Newsroom, Anderson Cooper, Wolf Blitzer, Sean Hannity, Chris Wallace. If you guessed like I did, you'd say in the tens of millions. Well, grand total viewership for all these news outlets is or can be from 3 to 7 million. You do know there are about 260 million adults in the U.S., right? 7 million viewers is not a lot of those adults. That's only like 3%. Just for contrast, back in the 1970s, over 30% of all adults watched the major network news. If that's not enough of a white pill, scratch the surface for a better one. Did you know, of those few millions still watching, about 80% are over 55. In fact, the median age viewer is 70 years old. Yep, I linked to that particular stat. In fact, the key demographic is considered to be 25 to 54 years old. So it turns out that group isn't watching. For that group, on a good day, the results might hit 500,000. But more typically, these shows are lucky to get over 100,000 viewers. And it's quite common to see only 50,000, 40,000, or fewer viewers watching some of them in that 25 to 54 age group. So the conclusion is obvious. The bulk of the viewership is from inertia. It's the older crowd doing most of the watching of this dying media. And that crowd, let's say it nicely, has the soonest expiration date. Let me emphasize the white pill here. The state's major means of communicating, the corporate media, is dying. I'll say it this way. The state's only real way of getting into your head, their means of keeping the myth of authority fogging up your head, is dying, and dying fast. There is no plausible way the world is going back to the time when the state had it easy propagandizing the public. Put in terms of this series, the state's environment has changed. In particular, its communications environment. The bully's ability to scare you and blind you, that environment is going away. Of course, this has been a pretty rapid decline in the media's standing. Well, politicians tend to be on the slow side, on the lower curve of true intelligence. They are, after all, just bullies. So they actually may not be feeling the effects quite yet. They still see the news media people in front of them, the cameras, the microphones, the awestruck looks, the respectful sounding questions. From their view, it may look a lot like before, but as the statistics show, fewer are listening than ever. It may take a bit longer before the bullies' brains process the memo that no one's listening. That was a big picture example, but sometimes the little anecdotal incidents are fun, and they tell you a lot. Right before the 2024 United States presidential election, the Washington Post was doing a video interview of several of their own columnists. The clip is only a few minutes, and I've linked to it. Basically, one of the reporters walks out, frazzles the others, and then it falls apart technically. It's a nice little encapsulation of the status of the corporate media. It's losing its cohesiveness, and they're starting to eat themselves now. Let's talk about the podcast world. Its importance was strongly evident this past election, where viewerships often exceeded that of traditional media many times over. Joe Rogan's podcast is a great example. What we found was that the world really didn't take notice of Anderson Cooper as much as Joe Rogan. I'm using those two names only as shorthand. The point is, it was very obvious the corporate media's influence in the news coverage of this past election came across as background noise, while the podcasting world gained prominence. I should say that this is not a black and white thing regarding the myth of authority. Most people, including, of course, alternative media personalities like Joe Rogan, are still victims of the myth. And this means in their own content, they speak in status terms. This itself reinforces the myth. So it's not like we have anarcho-libertarian ideas cleanly replacing corporate media statism. The transition happens in a slow, organic way. The myth of authority missteps, it slips a bit, then it may gain ground now and then slips more, slides more, levels off for a while. It's all part of the sloppy process of 8 billion human interactions. The trend, though, is what matters. In these examples, the trend is away from the old-style propaganda of just a few media outlets who are effectively perfect mouthpieces for the state. Now we're at the stage where that's about over, and In its place is this enormous number of decentralized content providers. They have no one single monopolistic message getting into our heads. People are consuming the ones they want and disregarding the rest. To be sure, people are still getting status content, but all these media providers are competing with each other. They don't have the luxury of delivering the same boring parrot speak we grew up with, delivered by people in clean suits and dresses, using that news desk speaking style. The statist message competes with 100 other factors to attract viewers, and at least for now, the ones attracting the viewers are the ones that come off as a bit more sincere, thoughtful, and reasoned. Okay, those were raw numbers, showing that fewer are even using the corporate media at all. Let's look at one of the reasons they're losing. It has to do with trust. If we go back about 50 years, about 70% had decent trust the media's reporting was accurate and fair. About 30% did not trust them. But today, it's reversed. About 70% don't trust them. About 30 do. I've linked to the Gallup poll showing the trend. And boy, is that a white pill trend. Trust is a precious and delicate thing. Once it's lost, it's near impossible to get it back. So here we have yet another example of this major pillar of the state withering away. Again, they literally have been the state's propaganda arm, and we are witnessing them vanish into obscurity. And by the way, this dynamic is not limited to the media alone. We all know what celebrity endorsements are. It's when entertainment celebrities or figures from the sports world, or really anyone who's famous, promotes or endorses something. This itself has always been a customary way to advertise. Obviously, it meant something because it's been around since there's been advertising. Well, celebrities have promoted statism as well. It's pretty well known that celebrities from music, comedy, movies, and television, sports have heavily endorsed leftist political candidates. And here in the US, the 2024 presidential election just ended, and celebrities strongly came out in favor of the Democratic candidate Harris. And yet, even with that advantage, she lost. Now, just so we're clear, I do not want this to imply I personally favor Trump, Harris, or any other politician. I do not. I also don't want to imply that the celebrity endorsement factor is the sole reason for the Democratic loss. My point is that the trust factor in celebrity endorsements clearly did not have enough power to achieve a win. Even worse, it couldn't avoid an embarrassing loss. The takeaway is that the trust factor in celebrities is likewise weak. This is a decent white pill. Whatever it is that drives public opinion, it's a good trend if the public is not highly influenced by superficial factors like a person's popularity. It suggests a hopeful public trend of improved critical thinking. So, this of course leads to the question of who the public does trust. In the answer to that question, we should recognize the beginnings of a wonderful white pill. To repeat, the choices the public are making for consuming content are shifting quickly away from the traditional media. No predominant content provider is replacing them. People are going where they choose to go. It can be alternative news media, podcasts, YouTube, or any number of other options. The type of provider, the specific podcast, etc., are as varied as we can imagine. The lesson here is that there is no longer a monopoly on information content. Everyone is choosing for themselves, and that gives us the answer to who they trust. Pay attention here, it's a big one. Who do they trust? They are starting to trust themselves, not to know what the news is. They're trusting themselves to choose where to find it. The specific choices they're making are less important. The big white pill lesson is that they are leading themselves. I know they mostly don't see it that way, but that's what is happening. They are seeing themselves as the authority over their information gathering. They are not robotically sitting down to eat dinner in front of the nightly news to be told what happened in the world and to be told what to think about it. They're becoming less passive, more active, regarding their own information consumption. Folks, that right there is the myth of authority in the process of wearing thin. It's the cracks in the glass increasing. As far as the bullies of the state go, that trend is only starting, so all the cracks aren't quite noticeable yet. It's like the air only starting to escape a balloon. It still has a round shape, but we, all of us, know the final fate of that balloon. And while we're talking about trust, let's not limit ourselves to people. What about the so-called law itself? It's getting more and more obvious to people that the law is simply whatever the state says it is, to fit the need of the moment. Most of us can see this trend. We all remember in our youth how the law was seen as a sacred thing. Officer O'Malley over there was everyone's friend. The upholders of the law were an elite group like the FBI. And sure, some of that is still around, but let's be honest, nothing like it was. Once again, recent politics in the U.S. serves up a great example of this. We all know that during the first Donald Trump presidency and in the years after that when he was out of office, the state went after him with a vengeance. Again, I'm not taking sides on this. I'm simply stating the obvious, that he was targeted hard by the state. And some of those legal maneuvers worked. He was convicted. He became a convicted felon. After that, what happened? He won the presidency in 2024. A convicted felon was elected president, and it was a solid win, not a nail-biter. This means more than 77 million people cast a vote for a convicted felon. Again, if we're honest and think back 50 years, or even not that long ago, a convicted felon would not even have been in the running. What does this say about the public perception of the law? It says they're waking up. Government law is not as relevant as it once was. It's more evidence the myth of political authority is slipping. And related to this is another conclusion we can clearly draw from the Trump experience. The state pulled out every trick in the book to attack Trump. They went after him legally, but along the way, the media bashed him constantly. They would always put him in a bad light, basically propagandizing against him relentlessly, editing clips of him unfavorably. Pretty much all of Hollywood spoke against him. Teachers and academics spoke against him. Foreign political leaders did as well. Many of the media platforms canceled him or throttled down exposure to him to their customers. People within the state itself worked against him. This even includes people of influence on the Republican right who switched to endorse the Democrat in the election. Nothing close to this ever happened in the political world, to my knowledge. All available power of the state, all available influence was marshaled against Trump. And yet he won in 2024. Take note of the white pill takeaway. If all that failed, it can only mean one thing. The state is weak. The propaganda is weak. The myth of authority ain't quite doing its job. No, I'm not saying the majority who went for Trump are past the myth. I'm saying the myth has weakened enough so that enough people are not fully in a fog about what the state did here. Plus, it reveals the weakness of the state itself. Even with all that influence and power, they failed against one person. That's weakness. And then there's the hypocrisy for all to see. Think about it. They kept labeling Trump as literal Hitler. You heard it. The end of democracy. The start of fascism. Hitler over and over. Sure, plenty believed that he was literally Hitler, but it doesn't take a genius to see he was not literally Hitler. That made all the Hitler name-calling look, well, weak and childish. And if that wasn't enough, remember after he got shot? What did a lot of people say? Even Joe Biden said it. They wished him well. Hold on now. If Hitler got shot, I sure wouldn't wish him well. So they, right there, reveal their hypocrisy. More evidence, folks, of how the state is helping us by undoing the myth of its legitimacy. Okay, let's talk more about politicians, how they try to pretend to look like normal people. Right off the bat, there's a problem. The myth of authority is predicated on the idea that the ruling elite are indeed elite. They're better than us. They don't have our weaknesses. they're above the rest of us. That's the very basis of the myth. But as the view of politicians has gotten worse, in desperation they drop the pretension of being better than us. Instead, they try to appear normal, like us. You see this starting right around the Bill Clinton era. Before that, it was the Eisenhower, Kennedy, Nixon, Reagan image, that attempt at looking dignified and above us all. Bill Clinton was an early attempt, at least to my memory, to look hipper. Maybe admitting to recreational drug use, playing saxophone on TV, whatever. That started the trend of trying to look more hip. Except for one thing, they are not like us. They are bullies. They want to manipulate and rule over us. That's not being like us. Normal doesn't come natural to them. Here's a recent example. Around Father's Day 2024, it was Senator Chuck Schumer claiming to be in, quote, Father's Day heaven, unquote, as he was photographed grilling a raw burger with cheese on it. Watch the link for a good laugh. They can't even pretend well without looking foolish. Now, here's some irony on this topic. You know, the corporate press, the mouthpiece for the state, the ones who are supposed to keep the illusion of authority going? What's ironic is that they've reported on that very topic. Politicians trying to look normal. They're pulling back the veil. And no, it's not from any libertarian or anarchist urges. It's their own desperation. As they sink into irrelevancy, once in a while they'll throw a Hail Mary to try to connect with the public. Anyway, here's just a few examples of throwing their masters under the bus. Each one is linked. The Financial Times wrote an article called The Politician's Trick of Pretending to be Normal. The BBC wrote an article entitled Politicians Trying to Look Like Normal People. An EV Magazine article, Elitist Politicians Pretending to Be Everyday People is the cringiest thing society never needed. An MSN article, Why Are Politicians So Cringe When They Try to Be Normal? Okay, here's another recent example of the state undoing itself. It was several prominent politicians saying the quiet part out loud. Recently on MSNBC, Hillary Clinton explicitly talked about how they are losing the narrative, how the press is not consistent in reporting against Trump. I linked to it. She's showing here how she's not really a fan of free speech. She doesn't want people to be able to think clearly. In other words, she doesn't like that the myth of authority is eroding. The very fact that she says this publicly shows desperation. You don't publicly complain about failing to fog people's minds. All that does is announce that you want to fog people's minds. Clearly a desperate strategy. This is part of the inept state undoing itself. The other example I linked to is from John Kerry. He too said the quiet part out loud, that free speech is basically an impediment to the state. Here's another change in the behavior of the politician bullies. In years past, they would do news and interview shows across the board. Why? The sheet of glass under them was solid. The environment was comfortable. So they would be okay taking contentious questions and at least pretending to answer them. Well, they were comfortable because even a supposedly tough interviewer was still within the bounds of the myth, never questioning political legitimacy. They'd only ask questions, as Tom Woods puts it, within the 3x5 card of allowable opinion. For the politicians, still comfortable. Not so much anymore. It's super rare to see any of them do challenging interviews. No, you mostly see them on shows that are friendly to them, that softball the questions. They've responded to the changing environment by playing it safe. That tells you the erosion of the myth is working. They avoid the environments where they do not feel safe, avoiding places with cracks in the glass. This is a good point to talk about the psychology of desperation. Remember the past behavior of politicians, how they acted dignified, calm, confident, smart? Of course, I stress the word acted. The media, of course, reinforced this illusion. And all of this made the state's actions look well thought out, well planned, the result of wise and selfless leadership. Now, why did they feel this way? Because the myth of authority was solid, so they felt that supportive, welcoming, hospitable environment. That was the source of their confidence. Remember, the myth and the bullies work hand in hand. The myth made the people compliant and worshipful of the bullies. That environment makes the bullies confident. So they put on the show of a dignified, wise ruling class. And this, in turn, reinforces the myth. Today, they show a growing sense of desperation, like they're making it up as they go. You see a bit more belligerence, childishness, and yes, bullying. And why do they feel this way? The myth of authority has started to erode. It's those little cracks in our sheet of glass, a different environment for today's bullies. Apparently, it's noticeable enough to start making them feel less confident. Sure, they still pretend they have wisdom and dignity, but with the erosion of the myth, more people see it as obvious play acting. How does this fit into the trends of the transition, of the erosion of the myth of authority? Nicely, that hand-in-hand relationship is breaking down. The eroding myth makes the people more skeptical of the bullies. That environment hurts the bullies' confidence. Their dignified act is harder to sell, half because the people don't buy it, and half because they don't actually feel confidence. The hand-in-hand now works against the state. Their lack of confidence is showing. People sense desperation, and they sure don't respect it. They have even less confidence in the bullies. And worse for the bullies, notice how it brings them right down to our level. They aren't gods anymore. They aren't wise, dignified leaders anymore. They're average people just like us. Don't we all experience lack of confidence at some point or another? Indecisiveness, even feeling not so smart? If the average guy sees those same weaknesses in the so-called leaders, it helps clear the fog. They don't have magical powers. They are just like the rest of us. It's the very definition of the erosion of the myth of authority. In turn, for the bullies, it's a different environment. They sense the loss in legitimacy, and that only feeds their desperation. Nice white pill pattern there. Okay, now let's notice some examples that show a very tangible changing environment for the bullies. How about this one, linked? It's actually from several years ago, although the post itself is recent. It discusses an Indiana law allowing people to shoot cops if the cops pose a threat. Think about it. Okay, you're a cop. The environment in which you operate has changed. You can get shot legally if the conditions are right. That's not as hospitable an environment as one in which people can never legally shoot you. You probably feel maybe just a little less confident on the job. You may talk about this with your fellow police, maybe even in staff meetings with management. Management can only do so much here. You just have to be careful, they tell you. You probably talk about this with your family, and they're not too happy with this new environment you're in. I hope you're seeing how the change in the environment has a real-world effect on the bullies. Their butts are on the line, and they know it. That security job at Walmart may have gotten a bit more attractive. By the way, if you check out that post, look through the comments. While you read them, think of the myth of authority and how it's eroding. Yet another example. And yes, if any cops read comments like that, well, it's just another aspect of their environment that might not feel so comfortable. I came across a guy who uses the handle Eyes on the State. I'll link to his YouTube and TikTok accounts. He's a great example of the changing environment. He's a regular-looking guy who basically does what the name says. He's got his eyes on the state. I have no idea if he's libertarian, conservative, anarchist. Not important. He'll personally confront bullies of the state, police officers, city council staff, whatever. Watch a few of his videos, and you tell me, does this guy show any sign of the myth of authority? What I like here is that anyone he confronts has to deal with something eye-opening. A regular-looking Joe standing up to them. He's not some high-priced lawyer in a suit. He literally looks like a guy you would see pumping gas right across from you. To the bullies, their environment now includes average-looking Joes who are not intimidated by them. But with this guy, it's not just that. He knows the rules of the myth, meaning the law. So he's out there throwing it back in the bullies' faces, making them contact their supervisors, and then the bullies having to back off. Enjoy watching. And by the way, I've seen content from other people who do this sort of thing. It's not like this eyes on the state guy is the only one. So just be aware, they're out there in the environment. Now, sure, it's unpleasant for cops to watch videos where common people stand up to them. But oh, you know what would be cool? If the police bullies saw a video of their own forces running away. We can only hope, right? Oh wait, that happened. In France in 2022. Yep, a huge group of crowd control police trying to intimidate a public demonstration. But the people stood their ground. So, did the police try their luck with more force? Nope. Instead, after only a few seconds passed, yep, I said seconds, the cops back off. No, not a standoff. No, not a negotiation. They flee. You get it? When they're outnumbered, their resolve vanishes. And I love the caption by the poster of the video. It says, "Government power is illusory." I want you to watch this and then think about my analysis of the environment that bullies find themselves in. Well, here, their environment changes in real time. The glass starts to crack under them, so their confidence disappears in real time. Wonder what they talked about with their families that night? Is police work as attractive as it was the day before? You tell me. Boy, from all that, you would think it would be getting harder and harder to hire cops and military. You would think that, right? Good, you'd be right. 'Cause that's another great trend. Not just the bullies getting afraid or backing off, it's the potential bullies deciding to not even be bullies. Read the links if you want the details. You'll notice with the environment changing for the worse, it discourages people from wanting to take these sort of jobs or to stay in them. And the reasons are right in line with what I'm saying. 1, the public views them more negatively. 2, the stress of the jobs. 3, genuine safety concerns. 4, more favorable options in the private job market. All that reflects the environment changing. Okay, now let's summarize because we have some high-level takeaways here. We see the myth of authority eroding. Right now, before our eyes, people are showing us they don't trust the propaganda. Not from the politicians, not from the celebrities, and especially not from the key pillar that supports the state, the corporate media. That structural piece in the state's foundation is dying as we speak. That's the myth eroding. Also, people are trusting their own choices for news content. That's the myth eroding too. The actions of people slowly coming out of a fog. Along with that, the state continues to reveal its utter weakness. The whole apparatus could not stop Trump. That's not from any magical powers by Trump or his supporters. It's simply that the underlying myth itself has no real power. And as the state gets desperate, we see it plainly. Politicians saying the quiet part out loud. Politicians trying to look like normal people. The corporate press itself pulling back the veil. The bullies fracturing. None of these behaviors would happen if the bullies were on solid ground. So yes, there is a sense there are chips and cracks in the glass. This environment changes the bullies' outlook. People aren't cowering before them as much as before. They see people standing up to them more and more. People are armed out there against them if necessary. The bullies can't meet their own police and military hiring quotas. Who wants to put themselves into this environment? And the existing bullies? They're more inclined to back off, shrink away. They did back off during COVID. You've even seen them literally backing off and running scared. No, it's not the state dismantling. It's too early for that. But the bullies are feeling it. And they're reacting. Fortunately, their reaction is not a heavy-handed totalitarian crackdown like so many libertarians were predicting. No, they're just slowly starting to feel uneasy. And another sign we're in the transition is the speed with which this is all happening. Think of all my examples. Pretty much all of them are clear trends. Go back 20 years and you don't see much of them. Go back 10 years and the trends are starting. 5 years back, the examples are more frequent. And since then, well, most of these examples are from these recent years. But there's also a takeaway I haven't mentioned yet. Time for an honest answer to a tough question regarding the erosion of the myth of authority and the state bully's environment changing for the worse. Here's my question. How much of all this can the libertarian and anarchist movement claim credit for? I suppose if you stretch the meaning of that question, you can try to claim they had a subtle role. But frankly, I see little influence that libertarians have in these trends. And even in that assessment, there's yet another white pill. These trends haven't been influenced, which means they've been organic. They've arisen out of the conditions of a decaying myth of authority and a ruling class with the courage of scared, scattering chickens. Better that it is organic than planned. But I will wrap up on a generous note. I'll end with a counterexample to that. Sometimes libertarians can have a platform and explicitly try to get a message out. I'm not an MMA or UFC follower, but I can appreciate a libertarian message when I see it. Back in April 2024, a UFC fighter, right after the fight, was plugging anarcho-capitalist economics. I'll say that again. A UFC fighter advocating people read anarcho-capitalist economics. His name is Renato Moicano. And then in September, he repeated the performance after winning another fight, plugging none other than the book, Democracy, the God That Failed. And yes, he said it, quote, "Democracy's a fallacy," unquote. You'll see the links. I leave it to you to savor those white pills. I admit to having been surprised at how many solid examples there are out there that support my contention that the myth is eroding, that the bullies are starting to feel it. I hope these have had their intended white pill effect to give realistic hope that the transition is solidly underway. Okay, we'll close this episode on that note. With more to come in this series, take care and see you next time. Many thanks to Substack for hosting my podcast and my articles. And thanks especially to you for listening. And remember, keep looking for those white pills.